What's up, captains? In today's episode, I had the pleasure of sitting down and having a fantastic conversation with Zack Blakeney. He's the founder of the Red Pill Method, and it was one of my favorite interviews that I've done to date. One, primarily because it was in person. So I actually went to Austin and we recorded this in his podcast recording studio. It was a blast. We touched on a lot of deep topics, such as addictions, all type of addictions. And his specialty is helping men with pornography addiction, something that I had struggled with in the past as well. So we talk about that a lot on this podcast. We also talk about facing your problems, especially as a man, and what that means to actually face those things that you don't want to look at, right? We also talk about changing your identity and neuroplasticity. Fascinating concepts there. And then we also get into what it means to enjoy the present moment, to be fully present in this very moment, not to be stressed out about what could potentially happen in the future and not be worried about what happened in the past, because you can't change that. That's called anxiety, right? And we also talk about exiting the Matrix, because The Matrix is a documentary, if you're not already familiar. Go back and listen to my podcast with Matt Maruka. In that episode, he mentioned to me that The Matrix is literally a documentary, and I had never seen it at that point. And then I watched it, and sure enough, holy shit, we are living in the Matrix. And so we talk about how to break free from the Matrix. So this is a fantastic episode. Like I mentioned, one of my favorites, especially if you're a man, or if you're a woman and you know a man who struggles with addiction or struggles with facing his problems, or if you might be in the Matrix, if you know somebody who's in the Matrix, this is a fascinating conversation of how you can, using identity and neuroplasticity, change your personal reality. So, but before we dive into today's episode with Zack Blakeney, a word from our sponsors. So first and foremost, this episode is brought to you by the Captain's Lifestyle Crew, which is my private online men's community where you get a ton of perks if you're part of the Captain's Lifestyle Crew. I hook you guys up. So number one, you get access to monthly masterminds, often with guest speakers from this podcast. Might have Zack come on and do a mastermind. That would be awesome. So yeah, monthly high performance masterminds. You also get weekly group coaching and accountability calls. So we get to hop on a accountability call with everybody else in the crew, talk about what's going on, things that we're struggling with, things that we would like support with, our wins for that week, what's going well. So ton of value there. It's also a high performance knowledge database that I update in various different categories, such as mindset, sleep, brain health, nutrition, time management, stress, biohacks, like you name it. There's a ton of information in there. You also get first access as well as discounts on in-person events that will be happening later this year. So, and you also get to network with the other high-achieving men in that group. So, like I said, a ton of value. And if you're listening to this in April, my birth month, you get $20 off your first month's membership. So I'm calling it the 27 for 27 deal, because I turned 27 this month, and you get $20 off the crew. So it's only $27 for your first month's membership. All right. And to get that discount link, again, if you're watching this in the month of April, you can click the link in the show notes, and that will get you $20 off your first month's membership to the crew. Next up, and also related to this episode is sponsored by Lambs, this EMF blocking clothing, and I'm holding up their underwear right now. If you're watching if you're not watching the YouTube video, if you're just listening, these are Lambs underwear. And what these do is they block electromagnetic frequencies from frying your balls. And if you're not familiar, if you carry your cell phone in your pocket, that's not a good thing. Also, if you use your laptop on your actual lap, you are frying your balls. This has been directly linked to reduced sperm count, reduced sperm quality. So if you're trying to have a baby, that's obviously deleterious to that. It's also been linked to testicular cancer and potentially erectile dysfunction. So we want to keep EMFs away from our balls, right? So that's why I wear these Lambs EMF blocking underwear. if I'm going to use my laptop on my lap, and especially walking through like airport security, for example, and in places of high EMFs. Right. So to get the hookup on anything from Lambs, I also have their shirt and their beanie. You can head over to getlambs.com and enter code Captain Morgan to save some money, or you can click the link in the description. Next up, and on the same topic of EMFs, this episode is brought to you by WaveBlock, this EMF blocking sticker that I've got on the back of my phone to reduce the amount of EMFs that I'm exposed to from my cell phone. So if my cell phone is in my pocket, first off, it's always on airplane mode when it's in my pocket. So that in itself reduces some of the EMFs. And then I've got this WaveBlock sticker that also blocks some of the EMF. All right. So I keep the sticker side facing me when I put it in my pocket. So double whammy there. If you're wearing the Lambs underwear and you've got your phone on airplane mode with the WaveBlock sticker, you're not getting any EMFs on your boys. They also make stickers that wrap around your AirPods. So to get the hookup on a WaveBlock sticker, either for your iPhone or AirPods, head over to waveblock.com and enter code Captain Morgan. That'll save you 20%. Or again, click the link in the description. And last, but certainly not least, this episode is brought to you by HVMN, specifically their new Ketone IQ product. These are exogenous ketones that I have been hooked on. So these are literally drinkable ketones. So there's two types of fuel that your body can use. Most people primarily use glucose as fuel if you're eating the standard American diet, or if you're not familiar with ketogenesis and things like that. Ketones is the other form of fuel that you can use. That is when your body is burning fat as fuel as opposed to sugars and carbohydrates. So I'm in ketosis for the majority of my day. I do what's called like a cyclic ketosis diet. So from the morning until afternoon, I have primarily fats and proteins. And then in the evening is when I will have my carbohydrates. So in the mornings, like if I go out on a long run or if I go to the gym, this is my new pre-workout. This gives me tons of clean energy without any of those jitters or stimulants that you get from these regular pre-workouts, which we could have a whole conversation about. So yeah, this stuff has been amazing. Also, when I'm fasted and I'm sitting down to work, a lot of times I'll get hungry and then I'll just take a serving of ketones, and the amount of mental clarity and focus that comes with that, it's unparalleled. I would say the only other thing is Newtopia. So, and those are nootropics. If you haven't heard my podcast with the founders of them, that's a fantastic episode to listen to as well. So to get the hookup on Ketone IQ, head over to hvmn.com and enter code Captain Morgan 10. That'll save you 10% on these exogenous ketones. Fair warning, they do not taste good. And I'm not doing it for the taste. I'm doing it for the mental and physical performance. All right, that is it for today's sponsors. Now let's dive into the episode with Zack Blakeney.
Welcome. We are recording this in your studio. My name is Renee, and you are Zack. And so this is cool. You reached out to me on Instagram. What was it, yesterday?
Yeah.
And you were like, "Hey, let's get a podcast." And I was like, "Are you in Austin by any chance?" And you're like, "Yeah." And so I was like, "Okay, well, let's do it in person."
Yeah, alignment.
Yeah, perfect. Everything happens for a reason.
Absolutely. Well, happy to be across from you, man, and meet you in person, and have the opportunity to be here today, man. It's awesome.
Yeah, I've been following your stuff for a while. I can't remember how we first got connected on Instagram, but then I saw that you were working with men, which I do as well, and so I was like, yeah, I connect with this guy, especially because of the pornography side of things and the porn addiction, which I struggled with as well. Mm-hmm. Although at the time I didn't know that it was an addiction.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was taking so much from me. And then I'll just start with a little bit of my personal story. How I came to realize this was, getting more into the personal development world, you start to see posts from, accounts like Carnivore Aurelius and people like this. You hear like semen retention and the negative side effects of porn and how it affects your dopamine levels and all this. And so I started to realize that from like a health and wellness standpoint. And then I had a girlfriend at the time. We're no longer together, and I would find myself jerking off like when she was at work.
Yeah.
And I was like, in my mind, I was like, holy shit, like this cannot be a healthy relationship. I was like, something is wrong. And at the time, I felt like I couldn't control it. At the time, like she would go and I would be home alone, you know, supposed to be working, and I would get the impulse to fucking jerk off, right?
Yep.
And I was like, this is not good.
Yep.
So I'm curious to hear your experience and how you came to this realization.
Yeah, kind of the same thing. You know, when I started watching porn, I was 14 years old. And for me in my timeline, like that was right when like AOL started to move to broadband, right? So like no more dial up, and like now we have high speed internet, and with high speed internet comes a whole bunch of content being thrown onto the internet. You know, I'm 14, right? And, you know, at no fault of my parents, you know, we had a downstairs basement and it was put together and there was a computer downstairs. And I was pretty much left unsupervised to explore, right? And it's not that they didn't catch me, because they did, and they tried to do what they did. But I'm a pretty smart guy, even as a 14-year-old, you know, really sneaky. Yeah, you know how to work your parents, right? Yeah. So I did that. And, you know, it was wondrous. And, you know, in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I get to see these things. I used to watch the fuzzy Cinemax, you know, before. So I was like, oh, I get to see everything. And, you know, slowly over time, it was a habit, right, that I didn't realize was having a lot of internal, not only psychological effects, but physiological effects. And it brought me to a place by the time I was in college where I was still a virgin at this time. And, you know, I'm not toot my own horn. I'm not a bad looking guy. You know what I mean? Like I had plenty of women that were interested in me, but when I had opportunities to have sex, when I was in, you know, high school and even in college, I had a fear around it. And I didn't understand why, you know, so there was like this fear of intimacy, this fear of getting naked and being with her, with any of the women. And, you know, it started to really like trigger inside of me that like it was unsafe. Like it's like sex with a real person was unsafe. But if I were going to be in front of a computer, I had no problem, you know, getting an erection and going through that process, because I had created a falsely safe space in a relationship with a screen and not a person. So once I actually started having experiences where I was having, you know, performance issues and not even able to get it up as a college student, right? Starting to look for like Viagra and things like that to use then. And then I was starting to having the real psychological issues, like, you know, my friends are talking about having sex with girls and they see me in the projection that I'm putting out. So like they assume I'm doing the same because like I have girlfriends and doing all this stuff, but behind the scenes, like I'm not. So I'm judging myself and I'm like, what's wrong with me? You know, and then these other thoughts start coming in. Like, am I always going to be this way? Like, why is this my experience and this is everybody else's experiencing, not knowing what was going on? So as I started to get more in depth, you know, and this is something that happens with pornography, is that there's something called escalation or dopamine escalation, to where when I first started, you know, heterosexual sex, just a normal thing was it. But then after a while, you get desensitized to what you're watching and you start tracing into a lot of crazy shit, like a lot of crazy stuff. And what I realized was that it doesn't matter the scene, it's just different. And because it's different, it's creating something different inside of me. So I started watching things like homosexual porn. I ended up watching, you know, rape porn and like all these different things, right? And it made me start to question my internal. And what led me to homosexual porn was not being able to perform with a woman, right? So I'm having what's called porn-induced erectile dysfunction, where you've actually remapped neurologically your connection to your brain to physical touch. So like I could literally think about wanting to watch porn and open up a laptop and bing, I was good. But in the fear state of being with a woman, it wasn't happening. So like that whole experience drove my ego to start thinking, well, maybe it is that you don't like women. So then I got imprisoned almost over the next 6 years until I was about 30 of watching so much different porn that had nothing to do with what actual sex was. I ended up getting married when I was 27. And the woman that I married, like we had such like a strong energetic connection. It was like our souls knew each other. And at the beginning, I was like, oh, like I didn't really watch porn so much anymore. I was like, this woman healed me, right? But then as that emotional intensity starts to lessen, and then you start to get a little bit bored, and then I found myself going back in it. And that's when like I knew it was a problem, but I hadn't faced it. I haven't admitted it, right? I was hiding. So like I was hiding it and I was projecting out what I wanted other people to see. But because of the shame and guilt, I'm hiding this thing, and it just becomes this whole duality, right, of living two different worlds. Well, finally, after me and her having a rocky sex life, and then I like got lost in drugs as well, like I got to hard drugs, and that was just, masking on top of masking. Finally, it came out, and she found it, right? And she had found it a couple of times, but I always had a story around it. I always lied about it, right? That wasn't me. Somebody hacked my computer, and she chose to believe the fable, right? But she knew as well. So I remember the day where, she actually like confronted me on it. And she goes to my phone and she looks up in private browsing, which I didn't know. But if you do something consistently in incognito, it's still going to say, oh, this is what you like. This is what you're going to do. And down pops, gay porn, mission porn, right? All this different stuff. It's not her. And she says, what's this? Immediately, in denial, wasn't me. This is your phone. How could this be anybody else's? Wasn't me.
Like the Shaggy song.
Yeah, exactly. Third time, if you don't tell me the truth right now, I'm walking out this car and like I'm leaving you. My initial reaction was it wasn't me. And then I broke down. It was like, no, this isn't me. Like this is something I've done, just beside myself and everything else through the process. So realizing and really starting to do the recovery process. And a part of that was like, acquiring the knowledge, like what happened to me? And one of the first things I saw that was like the moment in which I was like, oh shit, like I'm not doing this anymore, was the website Your Brain on Porn. It has 3 brains. It has a healthy brain, a brain on heroin, and a brain on porn. And the brain on porn looks worse than the brain on heroin.
Yep.
And I was like, shit, because you can't see it. You know what I mean? I was like, that's what I'm doing to my brain. And I have all these other goals. Like I started being an entrepreneur. I started doing like bodybuilding and fitness coaching. Like if I really want to become my highest self and that potential, like I have to have a brain, a neocortex that's operating right in a healthy way. So it was a very painful experience because of just the loss of identity and, loss of my sexual identity and trying to figure out who I was and then losing my wife. And then through that process, we had a business together. So then we stopped the business and then people start to talk, right? And I was really vulnerable, actually. Like I was like, oh, transparency. And I was probably too vulnerable to people I shouldn't have been. And it just created this web of like rumors. And I literally got forced out essentially of the gym that I was in. And it was by choice. They didn't tell me to go, but I was like, I just can't be here. The gym I was in, the friends that I had. And I spent about a year living alone and just working on myself. And I became obsessed with understanding how the human mind works, both physiologically, psychology, subconscious remapping, how that works, because I see that as like the light at the end of the tunnel. Because I was in the middle of it and I was like, I'm never going to change. I'm never going to quit. And then once I came across subconscious remapping and neuroplasticity, I was like, oh shit, I can. So there was a lot of hope and desire inside of that. And then also what happened was I unlocked like my higher level of consciousness, like unlocked these intuitive gifts that I've never really been attuned to. And then like spirituality really started to bring me into this new place of like where my power is and where it lies. And it was all about understanding energy and going through that process. So what I would say is that my experience with porn addiction, I thought I was alone. And then once I started doing the research, I'm like, oh shit, like there are studies that say literally 1 in 3 humans, not just men, humans struggle with pornography addiction. And I think that that number is way undersold because of how much shame. Nobody wants to talk about it. This is just people have talked about it. So I know that, everybody talks about this is the real epidemic. This is the real epidemic. Like it is. It's an epidemic. And it's creating so much pain for relationships, for people independently. And I think the worst thing it does is it blocks the ability to experience love in the most genuine form that you can.
Yeah. Wow. That is absolutely true. And we have very similar experiences with porn. I probably started watching it about that age as well. I can't remember exactly when, but same tactics. Like I remember, I know my parents listen to this podcast, so they'll know this story. I found a stack of Playboy magazines when I was like, I don't know, maybe 13, 14, like that age, in my aunt's basement, like old vintage magazines. And like every time I would go over to their house, I'd go in the basement and, rummage through these magazines. And they obviously found out about it. And then one time I went down there and they were gone. And It's like, okay, well, they fucking know that I've been down here looking through these Playboy magazines. And then same issues, the porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I didn't lose my virginity until I was 21, until after boot camp.
Same.
Yeah.
And even more so when it happened, like it wasn't very long. Like I penetrated and then anxiety and everything else. And even on Viagra, I lost it. You know, like it wasn't even like what sex should be.
Yeah. That's another thing too. I would go on like these sketchy websites and buy like this generic Viagra from like India or wherever it was.
Me too.
And yeah, I never did the gas station dick pills, which is a whole other thing.
Like the rhinos.
Actually, let's do this. Can you grab my backpack right there?
Yeah, for sure.
This is going to be an interesting story. So I was just at the resilience seminar with Mark England, and on the table, like in their house, was a gas station dick pill. It was like Rhino 69 or something. Yep. And I was like, what is this? And we started conversation around it. And so check this out. Look at this.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So
you loaded up.
There's a story behind this. Yeah. And this podcast won't come out for probably like at least a month or two. So the culmination of this will have happened by then. So yeah, it was this one that was lying on the table. Mm-hmm. And then we all started talking about it. And he was like, yeah, it's a fantastic icebreaker. Like people will all start talking about it because the seminar that I was at was like a language seminar, like storytelling and things like that. And he's like, yeah, it's a fantastic way to get a story started. And I'm going to another seminar this week and they know each other. And so he told me to get a bunch of these gas station dick pills. And at the seminar, I'm just going to throw them out on the table and watch what happens, to see this happen. And this one is my favorite, the big cock, 2,500, big cock, 7 days, long action, fast, works with alcohol, 2,500,000 power. And then one of the ingredients is semen cuscate. These are interesting things. So yeah, buying the fucking Viagra from India, like all this sketchy shit. And like every time I would have a sexual experience with a woman, like when I was in high school and even after high school, up until after boot camp, it was always the same thing, like no erection. Mm-hmm. And like if I did have an erection, it would go away shortly after because these stories I would play in my head and the performance anxiety. Yep. Which especially as men and when you're watching porn, it's like perform. You got to perform. You got to get the woman off. Like you have to be this version of a man who like just does everything right, Mm-hmm. And so those stories, as you know, play in your head and you start getting in your head. And then once that happens, it's almost impossible to break free from that and to actually be present in the moment and take all of the expectations off of the outcome, whatever outcome that is. Usually it's making the woman orgasm and then you having to come. It's like, forget about all of that. Yep. Just enjoy the present moment. And so for me, none of that happened until, very recently. And so yeah, lost my virginity when I was 21. And then even after that, it continued because I was continually watching porn and I would have to, force myself to get this erection. And a lot of times it wouldn't last long. Yeah. So yeah, bringing it back to what you said about neuroplasticity, that is very powerful. And then something I learned this past week is from Matthew Hussey, the relationship expert, is identity plasticity. Mm-hmm. So whatever story that we're telling ourselves about ourselves, we can consciously change that. Yep. And I know you're familiar with David Hawkins and his work. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how we can go from the shame and the guilt surrounding pornography addiction and how we can, to use your words, alchemize that into a more powerful state like love.
Yeah. And I would definitely want to go into that. But one of the things that you were talking about, like the identity attachment, and that's something that I've really started to learn, in these last year or so, of starting to really, I say like, unlock the real communication, like how the body, the mind, and the spirit are made to communicate. And then how, when we feel literally imprisoned or out of control, like what you said before, like I feel like I have no control of it, we're allowing the body and the mind, which simply are supposed to be there to inform the spirit of reality, to make choices. And it's not made to make choices. Your spirit has the free will to choose based off what your body and your mind is detecting in the reality. The mind says, oh, a spider is scary, right? And then the soul says, well, I'm not afraid of spiders, so whatever thought, you know what I mean? But somebody else says, the mind says a spider is scary. And then they say the soul attaches, right? Yeah, it is scary. And now you have a fear of spiders. Well, it's like fears are illusion. The reason why fears are illusion is because they're based off personal bias. Like you can be afraid of a spider. I'm not afraid of a spider. So like when I started to realize that like, these are real tools. The mind and the body are tools for the soul to navigate the way the soul wants. But when we inversely allow the mind to choose and we don't sit in the role of what we could also call in psychological terms, the observer, and observing what's happening. And once we attach our identity, our soul's identity to whatever thought, we grab it and it becomes the thing, right? But we could also just say, nope, that's a thought that's passing. That's a thought that's passing, right? Because ultimately your thoughts aren't you. Like your brain thinks involuntarily, just like your heart beats involuntarily. It's its job to think. It's your job to discern which thoughts you want to say, no, that's real to me. And oh, no, that's just the brain doing its thing, right?
And that's why I love that your program is called Red Pill. What is it exactly? Red Pill?
Yeah, the Red Pill method.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's take the red pill, like live in reality. And reality is in the present moment. And then pretty much what I use like porn as being a matrix because it's a version of the matrix.
Not this red pill.
Yeah. But really the matrix is anything that you're not present. Like if you're, stuck in the future and you're thinking about all these things you want to do, it's causing anxiety. If you're stuck thinking about the past and causing depression, regret and stuff like that, like literally you are choosing to engage in the matrix that is your mind. And the only thing that's real is what's present in front of us. So, and that's why I say being present inside of like a sexual experience is so powerful, right? Because you're not thinking about the outcome. You're not thinking about what happened before. It's just like, I'm here now.
Yeah. So if you guys haven't seen The Matrix, I recently interviewed Matt Maruka on my podcast, the founder of Raw Optics, blue light blocking glasses company. He mentioned on that podcast that The Matrix is basically a documentary. Like it is a documentary. And I had never seen it. And I was like, okay, well, I'll watch it. And I'm telling you guys right now, if you haven't seen The Matrix, go watch that movie and be present when you're watching it. Like think about present times and how this is actually playing out because it's real. Like it actually is a documentary. And that was made in what, 90?
96 was, I think, when it first came out.
96.
The first one?
Yeah, I'm talking about the first one. Watch the first Matrix.
Yep.
And then you'll understand the red pill, like free your mind, all of these things. And then you can start to detach your thoughts and what you believe to be reality and these stories that you're telling yourselves and what society and the news is like saying. And you can take a step away from that and be like, wait, that's not actually reality. Like you get to create your own reality based on your thoughts, your actions. I like the Joe Dispenza quote, your personality shapes your personal reality.
Yeah.
And so once you start to change your personality, your personal reality becomes whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, exactly. It's that narrative, right? Like hopefully there's not too many patriots on that are going to listen that are like really attached to the American dream narrative, but the American dream narrative is the Matrix. Like what we've been told, like that we want to do and what we should do with our life and how we would do it. There's so many people that are miserable doing what the American dream was supposed to be. Because ultimately you just get incarcerated into working for these big businesses. And then the big businesses, the government and the media, they're all the same thing, guys. It's the same, that's one fucking entity all working together and creating this, fear. Like just like porn can influence somebody to change like their sexual identity. Like if I sat around and watched the news all day, I would think the world was going to shit. Yeah. I keep,
most people do.
Yeah, like I keep up, like as this is recording, like the Russia-Ukraine thing is happening right now. Like I keep up with that because it has to do with what we're doing, right? It's America. And it's also my well-being. Like what if this comes here? But the whole Corona thing, like holy shit! Like
I don't think it would have been an issue if there wasn't mainstream media.
Yeah, no,
like,
not
I don't
at all.
think there would have been a pandemic. Like, yes, it's obviously a virus, but so's the flu. That's around forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's the fear that they're planting. That's the real, like.
Yeah. And then the other thing is that the fear creates stress. And then the physiological, I mean, like doctors talk about all the time, about 90%, and this is just rough, of long-term chronic illnesses and cancer and everything is caused by stress. So fear creates stress, and physiologically in the body, when stress happens, blood is preferentially sent out of the gut and into our limbs because we have to run, preferentially sent from the forebrain to the hindbrain to become reactive, and their immune system shuts down because you don't need your immune system. So these guys are constantly under stress with a contagious virus that's coming around. They're throwing more fear on the virus, so people have on the stress, so it's like you're becoming more susceptible to actually get this virus just from the narrative and what's happening with that frequency.
And then the psychological side of the whole lockdowns, like secluding yourself and being afraid to have this connection with other people. And I'm sure that pornography consumption increased over the past 2 years.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely did. There was actually a report that came out about when the pandemic happened. Like, I don't know the percentage, but a large chunk of the SEC was found to be watching pornography during that time. Like, they did a whole scan, and like all these SEC members inside the government were watching pornography. Like, this is happening everywhere. And it's also contributing to the child sex trafficking that's happening. It's one of the main areas that this is actually being influenced, and kids are being swept up and they're gone, right?
Do you think part of that is because I've experienced this as well? Like when you watch porn, like you mentioned, it started off with regular porn, like just Playboy magazines. And then you start getting into these ever increasingly devious porn, all these different kinks and fetishes and like rape porn and all that. Do you think that part of that could be because that they start with regular porn and then work their way up? And then it's like, okay, now it's little kids.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. It's this is what escalation does at this level. Like there are plenty of rapists that literally in court like blame rape porn for what's happened. Because, and I started to experience this a little bit as well, where like it goes from dopamine to adrenaline. And the adrenaline happens when you start taking what you're doing and you're trying to like make it happen in reality, right? So like when my adrenaline would go, it'd be like, I want to ask my partner to do something that I saw on porn, but I was so afraid, and like it was adrenaline, like I was shaking and like I couldn't do anything about it. So that's what happens. You take, the Matrix, and then you want to perform it. And then like now you've escalated to the point where you're taking action that's outside of what you've been hiding the entire time. So it's an incredible, like it's incredibly powerful, right? Not in like a powerful, like, but it's just powerful. It's powerful what you put in your mind because it becomes what you project into your world and what you're creating. So I'm just very selective now about like, okay, what I find out, I go to sources that kind of like intuitively calls to me, and I'm like, okay. And then when I listen, I always have my own free will to navigate. Is this serving my happiness and fulfillment and love? Is it not serving? And that's like the only judgment I try and hold. I'm not perfect, I'm human, but like that's the only judgment I try to hold inside of myself.
What strategies, tips, whatever would you recommend to somebody who, because I believe most people, maybe not necessarily listeners of this podcast, but I believe most people are mindless to, they're in the matrix. They don't know that they can separate themselves from their thoughts. And intuition, specifically for females, is such a powerful thing. And not females, but feminine energy.
Yes.
So what would you recommend to people to get more in tune with their intuition?
Yeah, men just logic the shit out of their intuition, so they don't listen to it. Which I love a quote by Jim Carrey. He says, fear is often disguised as practicality, as logic, right? So like something that men can do really well is they can logically describe emotions without feeling emotions. Like I can describe shame, but like feeling it is what it is. So my suggestion is to actually start to become very aware of like your body and like the feelings that are in your body. That's something that I help with these guys to make them realize that porn addiction isn't actually them. Like you are not an addict, you're having an experience, right? And this experience is stimulating an uncomfortable feeling in your soul. And what happens with porn is that you have what we're interpreting as a sexual desire. That sexual desire then turns into dopamine that's being flooded while we're searching. And then we have the ultimate experience, like where we masturbate, right? And then you have that experience. And then right after, guilt, shame.
Yep.
Like that is an emotional cycle. That's the addiction. It's this emotional addictive cycle. And we're not being aware of like, okay, what is the signal that's coming to? And once we become aware of the signal that the body is giving us, that's also aligned with the intuition. I like to say, like, when you're self-deprecating and like you're like really hard on yourself and all this stuff, and like you feel uncomfortable in your stomach and your solar plexus, it's your soul literally saying, "I'm not this way. Why do you keep telling me I'm this? I'm not this." Right? It's literally the soul screaming back and saying, "Hey, I feel contracted. I feel imprisoned by what you're saying right now. It's not true." But we just see it as like, "Oh, this is so terrible," and then we see the body as like this being a validation, I guess, to what we're feeling, rather than a challenge to what we're feeling. Right. And then once you start becoming aware that this feeling is a part of your intuition, and then you start literally looking inward, like you can hear the voice, you can hear it talking to you. And then what I've done with my work is I've started to identify, like when we're talking about like inner conflict, right? It feels like there's like 20 voices like coming from all these different angles, but there's really only two. There's one that has an origin of fear. That's the ego. There's one have an origin of what I call the inner guidance system that we call intuition, Holy Spirit. Like I just try and use non-threatening words to try and describe it, which is just made of love. And love stimulates its children of inspiration and courage and extension and forgiveness and compassion. And fear extends its children of doubt and insecurity and, all the different things that come along with that. Right. So like if you can start to say, oh, what am I thinking? Oh, I'm being doubtful. That's coming from a fear-based state. Fear is an illusion. Okay. Now I have this space. How do I want to think? Right. And just doing that, there's certain cues that you can do to unlock this thing. One of them I found is when I find myself in like a victim state, when I'm blaming or complaining, if I just literally say, oh, wait, I'm blaming something right now. What would happen if I took 100% responsibility for what I'm blaming myself for, or I'm blaming something else for, and there's silence, it'll talk. Because like we're directing it, like, because that's what it wants, ownership, responsibility, love. So be like, no, this is how you need to approach this. Another way I've been able to do it is, so I subscribe in my own spiritual beliefs to spiritual awakening, unity, consciousness, like we're all God, this is all God. Yeah. So, and even in Christian religions, they talk about the Holy Spirit, which is a form of God being inside of every single person. So I always see even pastors and stuff like, Holy Spirit, enter me. Well, that's the ego giving you illusion that it's separate, like it's already there. So I found a chant that I say to them, or a spell, I guess you can say, where I say, God, I surrender to your loving will. And when I say that, I just like internally like center myself here. And as I say it, especially if I'm in a fear-based state, it's literally like it expands and just like the rhetoric goes away, it like washes it away. So there's ways to activate your spirit or God within you. And if you know how to activate it, you know how to speak to it, and not speaking as separate, but speak to it, it becomes free flow. And at this point, it's just choice, right? I choose love. I choose to align myself with courage, with inspiration, what's doing this. And now I'm choosing with my free will, not all this. And again, not that I don't experience it, but I have a choice to detach and attach to what actually pushes me forward.
Let's talk a little bit about how we are all connected and how we are all God, source, whatever you want to call it. Because I haven't actually recorded a podcast on it.
Sure.
On this. This is something that I've been learning about recently. And now, like you said, I truly believe that, for example, what you do to somebody else, you're really doing to yourself. Same thing with the environment. Like if you litter, for example, that's a reflection of how you see yourself. Mm-hmm. Because, like how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's going to, so let's talk about how or why, or I guess explain how we are all one and how we are all connected. So from my belief and what feels true to me, and there's something that I also use to like identify truth, is like the serving. Like, is this serving my happiness? Is it serving love and joy, right? So if there's a perception or belief that is aligned with that, I'm like, cool. That's, to me, it's what I call being invincible. It's like, that's cool. So using that as the baseline, normal Christian religion, they've created, in my opinion, some metaphysical dimension called hell that a devil sits around and is like, and says that God is literally, the only thing that God is of love, and this loving God is going to take
God, his children, and damn them to hell? Like, can we start thinking about this narrative in this way? Because all they're trying to do is they're using fear as a way to control people's behavior to align with God. Never works. Fear controls, love inspires. If we just came from a place of love, it would lift people up and inspire them to that space. So like, that's one of those truths. So I'm looking at this thing, there's no way this is true. So there's also, the omnis, like omniscience. There's one omni that I feel like a lot of the religions that are monotheistic, they choose not to believe. It's omnipresent. Omnipresent is a description of God that says God is everywhere at the same time. That means it's literally everywhere. This microphone is God. Like there's an energy, frequency, vibration that is the entire universe. The entire universe is God. So my understanding of creation is that, and I also want to use some science in this space, like the quantum field. The quantum field has been discovered by science, and it says that there is one unmanifested energy interconnected through this entire universe. There's God. Like we found intelligent energy, like right here through this process. So if that's the truth, right, and then this thing is entirely as connected, what I understand is that in the beginning, God was this unmanifested energy, and then God, out of its own intelligence, desired to know itself. Well, it can't see itself. So it creates, out of love, light, and then gives the light free will to explore, because if it gives it free will, then God has an infinite amount of ways to explore and know itself through the process, right? So then we see the universe go up, and like you look at the universe and then spiraling energy, right? We see all these galaxies with spiraling energy. The planet is spiraling. We're going around. Like the spiraling energy is like a seeking energy. And it's always for us, like seeking has an energy to it that's seeking upwards. And then downward pouring is always intelligent energy. It's always pouring, but we block ourselves through doubt, insecurity, anxiety, lack of knowing ourselves. And this actually has to do with like the energy centers of the chakras. When we're out of alignment, we're not accessing what's being given to us because of our own fear. Our fear basically blocks us from doing so. So that's like the broader perspective. And then I start looking at this, well, then we're all God. Like literally every single one of us has an inner voice. That's something that connects us all. Also, every single one of us has an ego. Like that connects us all. So if it's in me, then it's in you. And now I can say what it's done for me is like, I just see you as an extension of me. Right. And if I can see you as an extension of me prior to like, let's say a conversation, I no longer feel separate. Like I'm not judging myself. I'm not blocking myself from what am I going to talk about? What I'm going to do? Because I'm like, no, I'm just talking to myself. Like, this is just what this is. And then also seeing this in a space of like how the narrative has been sent on us, because the narrative is all trying to separate us. Separation. That's an ego thing. Separation. And I think I believe the case is because if we all came together and unified and had this awakening that, oh my God, we're all God and like we're all here together, we can create a frequency that would just topple down the evil. I mean, this is proven, like it's proven to show that like when monks set up a monastery in a city, the crime rate decreases because they're all a little meditating on love and setting the frequency out. And this frequency is being subconsciously, felt through people and starting to inject love in what they're doing. So the other thing it does for me is like, if I'm made of the same thing that made this entire universe, it's very empowering, right? I'm like, man, I can get over anything because I'm made of the same energy, of this creation energy that creates everything. So those are like some of the truths that I know that have come from this, because all it does is serve me. And I know that God, in my opinion, God is just love and just wants to see his children spiritually evolve through this. And why would he do anything other than give us the truths that actually empower us to be our best version?
Yeah. This is hard for me to explain. And do you believe that there's currently happening some sort of larger awakening or leveling up of consciousness?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's a book that I follow. There's a few books that I follow, but this one book really started to change my life. And it's called The Raw Contact, Teaching the Law of One. And this book, again, is going to be way different from the narrative, but this book is a channeled work from the early 1980s. And what happened is that a group of 3 people, which was a questioner, a scribe, and what they call the instrument or the channel, ended up channeling an entity called Ra. And they channeled this entity from 1981 to 1984 over 109 sessions. Like if it's one time, come on, man, but this is 109 sessions over 4 years. And it's so of just stark difference. The woman is the channel, and when Ra comes into them, they are speaking. It's just completely different. This book is what I consider a metaphysical dissertation on spiritual evolution, on consciousness, on growth, and everything else.
Just to clarify real quick, Ra, R-A?
Yeah.
And is that separate from the Ra God, like the God of the sun?
They say that they actually came down into Egypt and materialized in Egypt, and they were the builders of the pyramids, and that the pyramids, the original source of the pyramids, was to create basically to help humans heal distortions, like the vibrational distortions of separation, and like being able to have them see truth through the process. But no, they said they materialized, and their mistake, the reason why they only channeled through this time is because they got seen as gods, and they came not preaching that. They came preaching literally unity, and they tried to give it to the Egyptians, and the Egyptian power took the power, right, and then started to use it to control and enslave more people through the process, so they left. So they actually feel like, they actually talk about in the book that they had this duty to come back and help heal the distortions that were created from the first time we were here. And then also, if you look at pyramids, they all came around the entire world. They all showed up at the same time in Southeast Asia, or not Southeast. Well, I think there is one in Southeast Asia, but definitely South America, in Egypt. They all showed up at the same time. There was no communication between the two. How would these people just know to build pyramids through this process, right?
Aliens.
So yeah. So what they say is that they are what's called a sixth density social memory complex. And what that is that we're in third density experience. There's a fourth density, which is what we would consider heaven. There's a fifth density, which is like a density of wisdom. And then there's a sixth density, which is where our higher self sit. And like, it's almost like a balanced density. And we have to realize that like the way they described it, this is millions of years of conscious evolution that they've gotten to. And they actually say that their original planet was Venus. In the book, they say at the around 1 million years they were on Venus. Just recently, 2018, science came out and found out that there was water and that there was life on Venus. In the same time that this book that came out in 1981 says that they were there. It's incredible. So what we find out basically is that in 2012, where the Mayan calendar ended, was the end of third density experience for us, which was a 75,000 year cycle. Third density experience is a density of choice and also a density of suffering, where we experience the most suffering so we can grow faster through the experiences. And then also there's the choice, which is either to serve ourselves or to serve others. And that's the separation vibration that we feel between the people in power and then us as like a unit, is like we feel this and there's a choice being made. And from this choice, we are consciously evolving into fourth density. And again, we're going to get pretty long because it's a lot, but there's two densities in fourth density. There's one that's of service to self and one that's of service to others. And right now there's a battle for this planet to figure out where we're going to go. But after fourth density, at the end of fourth density, our bodies, our chemical bodies start to dissolve. And then we become light bodies. And then we join together and become one whole, which is a social memory complex. And then as we are evolving through the densities, eventually eighth density, you go back to the creator. And like seventh density is the density of archangels and like this type of thing. So it's think about what we're doing right now naturally. Masterminds, going to, conferences and stuff like that. We are unifying to learn from each other. Yeah. And then we're just taking small units and then making them bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until we expand back and go back to the creator as the all. So I know we got a little bit off base, but if I were going to break down this book, we could literally have a 5-episode series of everything that's there. I just invite anybody that's on that maybe has felt that religion has some intuitive rejections. I listened to this book, no intuitive rejections. My soul was like, holy crap, this is what I've been looking for to really start to understand, to get out of the matrix and understand the truth of experience.
Yeah, because I felt this about 6 months ago, probably a little bit more than that, where it was just like, okay, I'm experiencing this. And then all of a sudden, like other people would either reach out to me and like kind of say the same thing or ask the same questions that I was asking, or I would see like these pieces of content. And it's like, okay, humanity is now starting to level up their consciousness. And so let's talk about consciousness a little bit and the work of David Hawkins. And
yeah, we'll get back to that question. I know we trace way far away from it, but it's all connecting.
So I was at the Road to Union seminar hosted by Aubrey Marcus through Fit for Service. And one of the first things I wrote down in my journal when we were all in this room together was the level of consciousness in here is incredible. Mm-hmm. That was the first time that I had been in a room of higher level of consciousness people. Mm-hmm. Everybody, had taken the red pill. They're not in the matrix. They understand these things. They, they're guided by love and they want to spread light and all these things, and you can feel it. Mm-hmm. And the inverse is also true. So at the resilience seminar, I talked about, I was having a conversation with one of the guys who, or one of the women actually, who checked her mom into a mental facility. And she said that she could feel in there just like this, lower consciousness, like this, and you can feel these things. Mm-hmm. And so first, just very briefly explain the levels of consciousness and what the heck we're talking about.
Yeah. So what's happened is that, David Hawkins took pretty much an inverse cone to show that each emotion that we experience has a frequency, right? A vibrational frequency that can be measured. Right. So at the very bottom of the cone is shame. And shame, I think, is at a 20. Yeah. Right. And then like love is at a 500. Right. So these consciousness, and as you go from love to guilt to fear to apathy to courage to like, it just goes up in that way. And I love this because I like making like people aware of like how you can feel this and how you felt inside of there. From what we can tell in some studies have been done, that when we're emitting love, like when we're emitting the frequency of love, it can be felt outside the body about 6 feet in diameter. But when we're emitting shame, we're contracted in. So if you're around a whole people that's emitting love, there's like a warm, sticky type of energy that's in the room. So when you have a couple that's together, I like to explain this to them. I was like, in the beginning, you guys are in infatuation, but it's really a form of love. And you both are expanding, so you feel that warm, sticky energy. But once the relationship starts to go, and maybe like you go through some personal things or something like that, and you start feeling guilt and you start feeling shame, like you might have a partner that contracts in. Now the other partner might be expanding. And then this is where this intuitive phrase comes up where I feel like I have a wall up. It's not that you actually have a wall up, it's that you're expanding and the other person isn't expanding. So if you can get in touch with this type of energy inside of your relationship, it's a great window in. Like I've been in a relationship before where like, when I wasn't really conscious and like my wife was like, is something wrong? And I'm like, nah, nothing's wrong, I'm fine. Yep. But she was feeling that I wasn't expanding out. So if we can start using this feeling, we can actually start to really understand where communication can come from, because it's not on just a verbal level, right? It's on an emotional level and a frequency level. And getting in tune in that allows you to start to come better together through the transparency of talking about it. So going back to the original question that we had about like alchemizing shame and guilt, right? The key to your freedom is transparency. Like that is, if we're talking about the densities, that is where we're going. Because what I know about law of one is in fourth density, there is no veil of forgetting. Like we have lived hundreds and hundreds of lives, like just being dropped into avatars essentially over time. And once we get into fourth density, there's no veil. There's also no desire to deceive or to hide anything. It is transparency. So we're watching this happen in society. Like all these scandals are coming out, you know what I mean? All the rich are being like transparent. This frequency of transparency is just happening as this transition is going. And it's the key to your personal freedom. Because what you choose to hide, shame is normally the thing that is the wall and the barrier. And as long as you continue to hide these things from you, this shame and guilt that's hanging out in the corner becomes the self-sabotage. Right? The thing that actually ruins everything that you're trying to do because of these things that you feel about yourself. So what I know is that we've had a perception of shame and guilt for so long that it's like darkness. Like, and we don't want to feel that way, so we resist it. Oh no, I feel inadequate, but I'm really not inadequate. Projection, right? Well, then what happens? You fucking wake up feeling inadequate the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And that's a trick of the mind. The mind projects out what it doesn't want to hold responsibility for. But once it projects it, it hides it from you. So you project it and then you feel like you've done something, right? That's why complaining and blaming is like, ooh, I'm complaining and blaming. So like I've done something. We haven't done shit, because next day you wake up complaining and blaming about the same damn thing. So what we have to do is say, okay, no, acknowledge that like I feel this way. Instead of seeing shame and guilt as darkness, see it as a light. It's a signal. Hey, you feel this way. Come explore. Then when we explore and we actually want to take a look at it, then the next step is you need to be transparent. You need to talk to somebody. You need to have, if you don't, get around people that are less judgmental and like literally are just willing to hold space, because I know that when I literally did this yesterday, I can tell the story, but I know when I express shame, the first thing that happens is all these little stories that nobody understands me and, I'm going to be this way and like all this, they dissolve. Like, because once I say, okay, I'm feeling this way and I just want to tell you about it. And, I would love to have some reflection on how to work through it. And then that outside reflection allows me to start to be feeling accepted, right? Through acceptance and the transparency, now understanding between the two becomes deeper. And from understanding, love deepens. So the route to the one thing I see, and I don't want to knock Tony Robbins, but like the old speakers that were like really rah-rah speakers, like you can have a beautiful life and love and blah, blah, blah. Well, I can't just do that. Like, that's the point. Like, I have to go through my own suffering first for me to find what you're talking about. And that's a step that most people skip when they go and they listen to these people because they go back. I found out the other day, there's actually a Tony Robbins suicide hotline for people that go to Tony Robbins events and come back to the matrix and are just miserable because they don't know how to integrate. And like the duality of like, oh, this is so great. And like, damn, my life sucks creates like this not wanting to be here anymore because of it.
Yeah. That I imagine that comes from, I haven't been to a Tony Robbins event and, no hate on Tony.
Yeah.
Robbins.
Yeah.
He's
Again,
obviously done amazing.
Incredible man, probably the most impactful man in the world. You know what I mean? It's just what I've experienced and witnessed.
Yeah. That comes, I imagine, from still holding on to and not first accepting and then letting go of old stories, old traumas.
Yep.
Because, and this is something that was new to me. I believe it was an Instagram post I saw the other day, something like that stress cannot fully be reduced unless you first, let go of and work through all this other trauma. So it doesn't matter all the, yes, breath work is incredibly beneficial. And yes, magnesium supplementation is a game changer. And all these, stress reduction tips, tricks, and hacks, whatever, all of those are good in the moment. And it's a short-term Band-Aid.
Yep, Band-Aid. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
You still have to go back and go into the cave, explore the darkness, and first accept what happened, and then forgive, and then let go.
Yeah. That's so I call this like three keys to speed or healing or whatever you want to call it in this space, but it's acceptance, understanding, forgiveness. Like acceptance, understanding, forgiveness. Like that's the route. And the resistance point is always the acceptance. Like my story of denying it 3 times in front of my ex-wife, you know what I mean? Like I was in denial. I was willing to accept that this was my experience because I had hid it so much. But and that's the hardest point. Like once you accept, like it opens up this new, like wondrous floodgate of like, oh, I can see a little bit better now. And like, now I can actually start to understand why I feel this way. And the understanding process is being able to go back into your trauma or go into whatever experience it is that you feel regret about, and you have not extracted the lesson of the experience. So we have to be able to extract a lesson. And the lesson becomes the initial way to start healing because it's what I call a fortification of the mind. So a trauma flash comes up. I used to do all these things like this was one of my best, I call it a grounding statement or fortification statements, trauma flash of watching porn. And then I would say, no, I was doing the best I could with the knowledge that I had. Like that was my statement. So every single time it was there, instead of attaching my emotions and my identity and intertangling with the thought, I would just say I was doing the best I could with the knowledge that I had, and then just kind of fade away. And then as I did that consistently, the trauma flashes stopped. And then once I got into a place where I was like, oh, I can breathe, now I can start working on forgiving myself, right? But there's too many people, like it's something that religion does. Like religion does not tell you how to deal with mistakes. They say when you sin, you go and you ask for God for forgiveness. Or if you're a Catholic, you go do 10 Hail Marys and like, you know what I mean? But like you missed a step. Yeah. It's my belief that there are no sins. There's only mistakes. And mistakes are rectified through your ability to find the lesson and to not make that mistake again. And the only way you get out of a pattern is to actually be able to look at it and extract the lesson. Then you can actually alchemize something you regret into something that you're grateful for. Like I felt so much regret about my experience with porn. I had so many different stories like, oh man, my 20s, my sexual prowess time is done and I've lost all these things. And then once I started to do that, I was like, holy crap, like now I have this duality of not really knowing what love is in that experience, and now experiencing love at such an intense and deep level. I don't think I could experience it without the experience that I had with porn. So there's just this immense amount of gratitude for what I went through to be able to sit where I am now.
Yeah, that statement you said, I was doing the best I could with the knowledge and experience I had at the time.
Yep.
That is profoundly impactful, and beneficial. Once people truly realize that, like, it couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't. Like, it could not have possibly happened any other way because the knowledge and experience you had at the time, you made the best decision at the time that you knew how to do. Yeah,
it cuts out all the I shoulda, I woulda, I coulda rhetoric, right? No, you shouldn't have did anything different because you did what you did.
Exactly.
Like the experience was the experience. How you are perceiving and interpreting the experience is your choice. But the experience is sold. There's no emotional filter on experience. It's how you're actually perceiving it.
And the same thing goes for other people. Like if you, like I had this past week at the Road to Union thing, there was, I won't go into this story here because I'll record a podcast on it that will come out before this. But there was a situation there where me and this other girl connected, like, you know, effortlessly. Like we were drawn to each other. Yep. And that was the first time that I had really experienced that. And then ultimately by the end of the night, it didn't work out. She went home with another guy, and that fucking crushed me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more that goes into that. Go listen to the other podcast if you want to hear the full story. And I was able to get over it in about a day. One, because I talked to one of my best guy friends and he brought me back. That was profoundly impactful. And I was able to forgive her so quickly because I thought that exact statement. Okay, she did the best that she could with the knowledge and experience that she had. She was not trying to hurt me. She was doing what was best for her based on her knowledge and experience.
Yep.
And I was like, okay, right. So I accept what happened. I forgive her and I can let it go. Right. So I just really want people to understand how beneficial that is once you truly understand that everybody's always doing the best they can with the knowledge experience they have.
Yeah. And a part of the awakening that's happening is that a lot of people are waking up, you know, to this alternate truth, right? But they don't have the tools to deal with their trauma. Right. So like, and that's really hard is because like, it's like, oh man, I've been living this life the way I've been living and I'm miserable and everything else. Well, maybe there's a better way. And then like you have this dawning. It's like, oh, here's the better way. But how do I get there? And it's not just about saying, oh, I'm just this person now. Like I'm just this now. Right. No, it's like literally you have to turn around and you have to literally start looking at, you know, the suffering, at the shame, the guilt, the traumatic experiences for you to be able to elevate your consciousness and start to put to a place where you have this deep understanding and appreciation and gratitude for life. I feel like this experience is like a video game. Like the more you level up in a video game, you get like a sword and a shield and like all this stuff. Like the more you level up with your experience inside of here, like I have intuitive gifts. Like I saw you had Gary Vee on. He talks about having chills. I get the same thing. It's like I get these crown chills. Like I'm actually getting them right now. I get them when I connect with somebody that's really impactful for me. And I get these crown chills, and it's just chills that starts there, goes down my spine. And it's something I never had until after the divorce and after I started actually doing these things. And then that unlocked the realization that like I was such a liar, man, growing up. And like porn was a part of being dishonest. And then once I stopped being dishonest and I started being honest, like now my intuitive gifts is I got a fucking BS meter because I was so good at doing it that like when I'm coaching my clients, I'm like, okay, so like, you're saying this and it's this, and we're going to talk about this. You can keep killing the bullshit, but like, we're going to talk about this right here. And that's what made me such a great coach now. Like I wouldn't have had that if I didn't realize that like I'm using my gift in a different way. It was the same thing with visualization too. Like I was an expert at visualizing porn images while I was with partners because that was like the only way I thought about doing that. And then I was like, holy shit, I'm a master visualizer. I've just been using it for my shadow. And now let me start literally creating in my mind the vision that I want to have for my life. And I'm more adept at it than most people are. I was just practicing and doing it the wrong way, you know? So it's like, that's where you start to see you could say like the yin and yang duality or like the Joker Batman type of thing. Like Joker and Batman are the same. They just have one difference between them. One wants order and one wants chaos, right? And that one difference separates their entire being of who they are, but they operate in the same way.
Yeah, so let's bring it back to porn addiction. And really this could be, I don't know, you tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that for me, porn addiction and limiting and, spreading out masturbation and ejaculation was the last thing that I had to conquer, at least that I'm aware of. I had never had a problem with food or like binge eating or anything like that. I had trouble with video games because, again, it's just dopamine. Same thing with scrolling social media. It's just instant dopamine hits. Basically, you're being addicted to that pleasure, that comfort. For a lot of people, it's, not going to the gym. And I feel like for a lot of people, pornography, at least this was true for me, was the most difficult one. This is why it took me so long to conquer, even when I knew it. And I had known it for a few years. I was like, I know that this is destructive for me. And also I wanted to get into the health side effects of all this too. So just want to make a note of that. And I knew this, and I was like, okay, I've conquered everything else. I can do anything. I can fast. I can go in the ice bath. I can do brutal workouts. Why can I not kick this porn addiction? So I think for a lot of people, it is the most difficult. So I think, what would you recommend? Would you recommend starting with like kicking some of these other addictions, whether it be to food, social media, whatever, and then working your way up to porn? Or do you start with porn? How does that work?
I mean, I guess it's just going to be like a person by person basis. Guys come to me for the porn that's specific. And normally, like you're talking about, it's so hard to kick. One, because you don't have to go find a drug dealer. You know what I mean? Like literally your phone, it's access. It's everywhere. So that's so easy about it. The other thing is that emotional cycle that I described earlier. Like when you do drugs, you're missing unless you have sex with drugs or something, but if you're not, you're missing like the actual ecstasy feeling. And you're really not experiencing too much shame and guilt about it immediately. Like you might wake up the next day, like this is a very short cycle, right? Of that I described. It's all happening within, let's say 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how much you want to browse, right? Yeah. So it's very intense. And then that's what creates the triggers. You were talking about when your girlfriend leaves, that's a trigger, right? So that's a trigger for your body to say, oh, hey, like she's gone and you've done this before subconsciously, mapping it, right? So let me send some emotions of sexual turn on because that's what they want. So it's about really starting to understand that this whole thing isn't about the action of porn. It's about literally starting to deal with these emotions and discovering yourself through the process. Like my program, when I have guys come in, like they think, like even though when I do like my calls and everything to actually get in the program, I let them know it's like, this isn't really about porn. This is about like finding your purpose and finding your authenticity and really starting to create from a space in which you know, rather than a space that you're reactive to. And I create a little bit of clearance because there's an app that I partnered with that'll create clearance that'll actually make it so that like if they want to look at something, I get their password, which is great. What I mean by clearance is that like, okay, now you have time to breathe. Like you don't even have this as an access. Now let's use all this energy that you're using to do in this addiction to start putting towards creation of who you are. And through that process of doing it, it's like the addiction kind of just starts to, again, with subconscious remapping, it just kind of starts to fade away. And then at the end, we take the lock off and then they start having the choice of doing that through that process. And then it's like, well, at that point, we've literally gone 90 days plus an extra 90 days of support through like our group that, science shows about a 6-month remapping process. That's what it works. It was for me. So it's literally inside of this to try and figure out, okay, how do I break free from the addiction of porn? It's literally dealing with the emotions. What are you shameful about? It might be the porn. So let's talk about why this is. Why do you feel inadequate? Why do you feel incapable? What are just the other traumas that had pushed you into escaping into this thing? Because that's what it is it's just, and that's what I tell people, like literally, like if you can take this emotional cycle of stress and anxiety, right, in the present, don't want to deal with it, escape into video games on your phone, right? Oh, I got done with the video games. I should have done that. I should have did this. Guilt, right? Shame, right? So it's the same emotional cycle. So like you can take porn, interchange it with video games, interchange it with drinking, interchange it with drugs. You can interchange it with whatever you want. To actually heal the addiction, you have to deal with the emotional cycle. So that's why I was that's where I was looking at like the 12 steps, and respect for the 12 steps. I don't want to say that's a bad program, but I think it's a program that's made in the Matrix because they start with, hi, my name's Zack. I'm a sex addict. And then as you're doing the 12 steps, they say you will always struggle with this. You will always have this problem. That's the consistent message through it, because they don't realize that literally you're putting a spell on these guys to say that to need them still, right? And I'm like, that's all archaic because you're focusing on the behavior, not focusing on the emotional cycle and really finding purpose in your life.
By the way, the definition of a spell is a word or a combination of words believed to hold great meaning.
Yeah, all words are spells.
Yeah.
That's how I try and reframe these guys too. I'm like, literally everything you say to yourself is a spell.
So you're literally casting magic. And if, like, obviously the 12-step program has helped a ton of people.
Yep.
And I wasn't aware that, I guess, not consciously aware that, you do start off with, hi, my name is this, I am this, like, you are this thing.
Yep.
Which is completely not true, right?
Yep.
And then I wasn't aware that they keep reaffirming, like, you will always struggle with this.
Yeah, and then once you get to the 12th step, which the 12th step is to turn around and be a sponsor for somebody else through that process, there's plenty of people that are sponsors that aren't made to be healers. And then you hear about sponsors that are relapsing. Like, I'm working with the guy right now. He's an alcoholic. And like, I'm working with him through the same process, just working with him with alcoholic. He was talking about it. He was like, I was having a conversation with my sponsor yesterday and he told me he relapsed. And it's like, how can I continue to like have his advice if he's relapsing? I was like, well, the thing is that again, service to others is a beautiful thing, but you don't need to continue to serve others inside of what your trauma was. Not everybody's going to do that. Like, you can find other ways to go serve others and have that process inside of you. And then the other thing that would happen to me is I was going to these groups. So you go to the SAA groups, and like I was being triggered by what they were talking about. I'm a porn addict and you're over here talking about having sex, a threesome with your thing. And I'm just like visualizing what that would be like. Right. And it's not about to leave porn behind truly was the realization that like, even if I'm imagining porn and jacking off to it, or if I'm imagining porn and I'm having sex with my partner, I'm still addicted to porn. It's still there. What you imagine is still happening, right? So like, I had to learn how to be very present. I had to also keep my eyes open, like when I was having sex, like, because I knew if I closed my eyes, it could go. And then in the energy centers or chakra version, like when we're having sex and it's self-serving, we're only activating what's called the solar plexus or the yellow energy center. And that's when you can have sex with a woman. And maybe after a while, she's like, I don't know, I didn't feel that you were really there. That's because you didn't open up the heart chakra. The heart is where sex becomes making love. Yeah. And then that kind of love is erotic. Like that's the type of love that I never experienced before because I was always just self-serving. You know what I mean? I'm like, let me get mine and get out of here. And my ex-wife used to tell me all the time, she was like, I just don't feel connected to you during sex. I'm like, well, it's because I'm not actually trying to be connected to you. So that's where porn's really hard to get over. It's not just about what you're watching. Like you can get over that in that space, but if you're still using porn imagery to get off, you're just, reinforcing the same cycle.
One of the things Aubrey Marcus said in The Road to Union was to get on the inside of the experience. Like if you can get inside of her body and then what she's feeling, you're feeling.
Yeah.
Like once you can get to that point when the reciprocity is immediate, like you can feel what you're giving to her.
Yep.
That is powerful. And that's something at least most guys that I know are completely oblivious to. And like you said, it's just, how can I get myself off?
Yeah. And it's the process. That is what is being present. Like if I'm totally present in this experience, like, it's a give and take. Like I'm feeling her body and so, but like what's actually very erotic is witnessing her.
Yeah.
And by just being focused on her, well, I'm not in my shit. You know what I mean? I'm not doubting. I'm not going through that process the entire time. So, just kind of going back to like, okay, this emotional cycle, like what I've figured out through me, and I want to be really clear about this, that it's not about eradicating shame and guilt. Like we'll never do that. Like the point is not to eradicate it. Shame and guilt are very powerful emotions. They are signals. And it's just about being able to not hold on to it and say, oh, I'm feeling something. Let me explore and let me express. And once you do that, you'll have clearance for a little while. And then you'll probably come to another experience that might cause this. I was sitting across from one of my peers, one of my friends, he's a peer, and we were just talking science and stuff like that. And I talked about something. It was like, well, actually, man, I saw a study and the science doesn't really support that. Woo. I'm used to being right. Like, it's just what it is. Like, I'm just used to being right about what I do. So the first thing that happens is my ego rejects it. Nah, fuck you, man. Like, I'm not wrong, right? The second thing that happens is that my body experiences the shame, like that. And then the third thing that happens is that my soul is like, hey man, it's okay to be wrong because like you don't know anything. And the more you learn, the better. Right. So I'm like sitting here for like 20 seconds. I have an eat shit look in my face. And then that's how I responded. I was like, hey man, thanks for correcting me. Like, thanks for letting me know. And he was like, dude, I thought you were like going to get mad or something. I was like, no, it's just my natural reaction, like to what happened. But I just needed a little bit to center and really choose how I wanted to respond to that. And the truth of the matter is that we have to sit in this duality of being proud of what we know, and also recognize that we don't know shit. And if you can sit in that balance, like it's very empowering because you're learning and you're also being very proud of yourself, and you're making sure that your worth is up through that process.
Mm-hmm. I'll say that you said we'll never get rid of shame and guilt. I'll say maybe in this lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? Because, ponce you get up, past the level of consciousness of love, and then you go to joy and, all the way up to enlightenment, then there are none of those feelings.
Yeah.
And that's a very difficult thing to actually achieve.
Yeah. Like once we go to like fourth density experience, going back to law of one, and it talks about it. It's like, it's the density of love and understanding, and transparency is the only thing that's there. It's the ability, like, I love an analogy that they use. They use an analogy of a poker game. They're like, in a poker game, like you get dealt different cards and it's redelt, and you're playing the game. I was like, well, the cards really are love, anger, regret, sadness. And the whole point is that all cards are face up and you love every card. Like no matter what the card, love every card. You're like, that's how you win the game. That's what this game is. And once you go to fourth density, this non-desire to deceive, it just makes this free flow of understanding and learning and understanding and learning. There's no rejection. There's no anything else. It's just literally the desire to grow as a unit together, right, in love. And it becomes this utopia that unfortunately some of these cults have tried to make that didn't really be that, but it actually becomes this. And it's, again, what the Christians refer to as heaven, right? This next transgression into this next plane of existence that is just no more suffering, like just literally love, joy, and understanding.
Yeah. Love is one of my favorite words now.
Yeah, me too.
Love, and I always capitalize it.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be capitalized. And I talked about this on my podcast with Gary Vee. I had always cared about people, right? But it was always from like, I'll give you this, or I'll do this with the expectation that you will give me something in return, or that I will get something back, right? And, people would always tell me like, oh, you're so selfish, like you just care about yourself. And first off, yes, I do care about myself, because in order to give to other people, I have to first take care of myself. And I was thinking like, how can I be selfish? Like I am giving to other people. And they were right, because I was expecting something in return. Yeah. And I mentioned on the show with Gary, it's like, now I don't give a shit about any of that. I don't give a shit about money. I don't give a shit what you give me in return. If I give to you, like I mentioned, the reciprocity is immediate.
Yeah, giving is the gift.
Exactly. And once I realized that love and loving all things, loving all people, and it's going to be different forms of love. Like obviously it's not, I don't love you in the sense that it's like, like I want to have sex with you and have a relationship.
It's universal love, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Once I understood that like love is the ultimate goal to aspire to, everything changed.
Yep. Yeah. And I've actually started to understand, and this is, again, just my understanding of love and how much skewed it is, I guess, in a sense of like codependency attachment and what that does inside of love. But like the first level of love to me is to, focus on yourself, because if you're your best self, then like you can actually give to the amount that you want to be able to give. The second amount of love is the ability to say, okay, you would like my help and I want to be able to help you. So I'm going to give straight truth, right? From what I know to be true. And the truth is not always fun to hear, right? But the truth is love. And there's people that aren't ready to hear the truth. So they'll, they get personally offended and they're like, oh, that's fine. Like, I don't care what I just know that I believe that this is what you need to hear. And I'm giving it to you out of love so that you can have an awakening of your own and start looking at it. And then the third level is, cool, if you're not going to do what I ask you to do, at least in the coaching space, I sever the ties. I say, okay, cool. I've done everything I can, but I'm going to cut this energetic tie and I'm going to let you go. Why? Because when I got the energetic tie cut from the divorce, I couldn't see myself while I was in the middle of the divorce. She told me I was lying, manipulating, all these things. I couldn't see myself. Once she cut the tie, I was like, oh, I was being those things. And it happens when I was in the bodybuilding space and doing more coaching in that, it would happen all the time. I let a client go. And then 3 months later, that would, like, the client is like ripped and about to get on stage. And I'm just like, clapping in the background, because I know that the energy that I did and took away from that, they use that as fuel, right, to actually achieve their goal in some other way. So I'm totally okay with it. I don't have to be the person that does that.
Yeah.
But if that's a level of service that I can give you, then I'm going to give it to you. You might not see it as such. You're going to get angry, but it is going to work. I promise you.
Yeah. And that's why I don't really view anybody as competition. Like I've interviewed people on my podcast who do almost exactly what I do. Like you do very similar work to what I do. I've interviewed other, holistic coaches and men's coaches and, whatever. And I don't care if the listeners go to them as opposed to me, as long as you are getting the results that you want. That's all that matters. So especially in business, I think I know that we need to get out of this competition, like I win, you lose side of things. And instead collectively, as the whole human race and universe, work towards this common goal of, I believe, love.
Yeah, and that's love is equality, right? So true equality, and all competition is masking judgment. That's all it's doing. Because like when you see somebody, like if you're going through a process and like you see a competitor, and if you're going to actually go through that process, you see the competitor and you're judging this person like they're farther along than you in your view, right? They have all these things, everything else. You're judging this person. You're like, oh man, he can't have all the things he has, man. He had to do something like really skeezy to get that. And all you're doing is that you feel unequal, and you're using judgment to try and equalize the situation inside of you. Right. But then what happens after that is you start self-deprecating. Right. So I'm like, oh, man, what do I don't have? What am I lacking? Everything else. Like, so then you judge that person to try and lift yourself up to see yourself as the equal. It's all an illusion. Like judgment is living free is living free without judgment and concern, because judgment only has two outcomes. You're either guilty or you're innocent. And most of the time when we're judging somebody else out of our perceptions, not out of our knowledge, it's always a judgment of guilt. And the only reason we judge other people is because we judge ourselves, and we've seen we feel like it's done something because it's shifted who we are, whether it's good or bad. So because we judge ourselves, we think it's effective, and then we judge other people through the process. But then all you've done is just created this whole limitation, right, of being unable to see truth. You're back in the veil. You're seeing the things through the matrix. So competition, me being like I was born a three-sport star. I played college baseball, super competitive. And then that was one of the biggest things that started to deflate for me in a way. And just like, no, man, like you're doing great work with men. I see other people doing great work, healing work and everything else. Like, please, the collective unity, we're all one. So like help our sisters and brothers to elevate so that we can just elevate together and create this society, right, that we really want to live in, that would really lift us up.
Have you read Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein?
I haven't.
You would love that book.
I'll check it out.
I saw your post you were sitting on a stack of money and you're like, what if we just like question the idea that money is the form of currency?
Yeah. I was saying like my idea was like, what if at once, I wish I had a microphone that like everybody could hear on Earth. And it was just like, what if we just all decide that money isn't a thing? Like we have all the resources that we need for everybody to be able to support their family and the type of home that they want to support, the food that we want to have. We have everything that we need. It's just that it has been hoarded by the people that want to serve themselves to enslave us that want to serve other people. And we're not waking up to the fact that, again, we're sitting in the matrix, that we've been fed a narrative that isn't true. And there's in the spiritual space, there's a lot of different things, but one of these, a woman who's kind of like a psychic, and she was saying that she got, visited by some ETs, and they literally said to her, they said, if everybody on the planet decided at once to unite at once with one intention at one time, it would just happen. But we can't unite because the narrative has forced us into separation. So something that we're doing here in Austin, which I'm really excited about because we're going to do it the first time. I'm calling it an event called Unified Intention, where I'm getting I have 4 different groups of light workers, and I've kind of been the interconnected one. And I want to bring us all together and all just kind of sit in a circle and then just have the intention of love, right? And just meditate on love. Just in the same way that the monks, right, create that thing. Like, let's start creating the energy. And Ra in the Law of One talks about that when one person does it, it has its own energy, but 2 double it, and 3 double it, and 4 double it. So the calling becomes greater and greater through unity because that's the truth. That's how we're supposed to do it. So I'm really excited about getting that started because it's very aligned with like, how can we actually start to make impact? How can we fight the war without being violent? And that's the way that we can do it.
That sounds incredible.
Thanks, man.
Keep me updated on that.
Yeah, the thought dawned on me like last week, and I was like, "Nah, we're doing this.
Yeah.
Let's go."
Yeah, and also, read Sacred
Yes.
Economics, and then we'll do a part 2
Okay.
of this and get into that. So 2 more things I want to talk about, and really they're kind of one thing: the transferring of energy from the porn and the ejaculation into whatever you want to put that towards, business, for example.
Yeah, creativity.
And then also the physical side effects of frequent ejaculation and also pornography.
Yeah. So, the thing about sex, though, like sex with another human being is it's an energy transfer, like it's a flow together. So like when we have sex with somebody else and we end up, ejaculating and having an orgasm or everything else, and it's with a person, the orgasm from both exchanges the energy and it actually vitalizes and makes us better. But
if you're with a person who has, I'm not really sure, I'm just learning about this too.
Sure, yeah.
Has a higher level of consciousness or has a similar energy to you. Because if you have sex with a person who, for lack of a better term, is like lower than you or like has these feelings of fear and anxiety, and you just have sex with them to get off as like a hookup, that takes energy from you, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So it's the point in which both people can open up the heart chakra, which is an expansive energy, the vibration of love, right? As both people can open it up, it becomes an energy transfer. And it's a very powerful energy transfer. But if both people aren't opening up in the heart chakra, one isn't, then it's just a take and nothing is happening through that experience. So it has to be the transfer comes, not a take, right? So what we find is that, when we, ejaculate or do all those things, like literally it's called, transmutation or something like that, where you can sexually transmute your desired sexual energy and turn it into creativity. Again, on the energy centers, it comes from the sacral chakra, the orange chakra, which is that feeling down below where it could be sexual turn on, it could be anxiety, it could be excitement, it could be creativity. Like it's just how your brain is interpreting what that emotion is. So it comes from the same space. So if we're using it, this sexual energy as a way to, and just like waste it, then we become less creative over time. And by becoming less creative over time, you have more brain fog, your energy starts getting lower because, the ejaculation is your vital energy. It's vital energy, which runs your mental energy and your physical energy. So if your vital energy is low, so those things are going to be low as well. But you can have really high vital energy and low mental and physical energy. Like that's what meditation is so great for. Like you can be like, man, I'm super tired. And then I do transcendental meditation and I can come out of transcendental meditation. I'm like, damn, I just feel like I have like a monster or something, like it feels like caffeine, but it's not, it's super clean. So ultimately, again, when we're doing something that's self-serving and when it comes to, ejaculating, if we're not doing it in a way in which we're actually getting something back from it, it's just kind of draining us over time.
Interesting. What are your thoughts on ejaculating for the purpose of better sleep?
I don't know. I don't experience that.
Because sometimes now, like if I have a stressful day and I've worked a little bit later or whatever, and I haven't masturbated in a while, I'll say, okay, I will ejaculate now for what I'm telling myself the purpose is to get better sleep. Because, when you ejaculate, serotonin increases and you do sleep better. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually don't have too much to say on it just because like I haven't experienced that in a way. I'm not going to say that this is the case, but like we can create all sorts of different stories on things connecting. Like one of the most favorite things I love to do is like let's take this pyramid and let's take these pills. These are two completely separate things, but you could create a story that has to do with these two, right? Like this happens a lot of time with like money and fear, like scarcity, right? Like money is just money. Fear is this other thing. But like you've created stories that become your reality that then dictate the actions happening from that space. So I don't know if that's the case or anything else, but just like for me, I sleep pretty well. Right. And whether I jack off or don't jack off, I've never noticed like whether the depth of sleep is different. So in that case, I can't really speak to it for that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it used to be every night that I would do that. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, I don't know, once every 2 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about the physical effects of both frequent, like daily ejaculation, and we're talking about men specifically. Women, I believe, should orgasm every single day. It's better for them. For men, it's something completely different. So let's talk about daily ejaculation and also the physical effects of pornography.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the intentionality in a sense of, like, I always like to say, like, every intentional act is a magical act, right? So, like, whatever intention you put behind it is going to create what you want to create through the process. So if you're, let's say, jacking off in what you were talking about, like your girlfriend's gone, right? And then you're going to jack off because you want to jack off and it's because she's gone. Well, like there's a whole like energy around that, which is attached to these lower level emotions, like inside of the consciousness, right? Yeah. But if you're totally okay, right? You're like, I just feel kind of like sexually turned on and like, well, I don't have a partner, I don't have anything to do and I want to do this. And you're okay with it. Right? There's no guilt. There's no shame that's a part of it. I feel like you're going to be okay. I feel like it's not going to be as draining, right? As if we did it in the other way. So I really think it comes down to, it's like, well, again, how intention, like what are you doing and how are you doing it through the process? Because that emotional frequency is going to go with whatever you're doing. Like there's not something that the law of one talks about, and there's importantly not a lot of science behind this, but we find out that like every virus is inside of us. Like we have like all the different viruses. We have cancer cells that are in that aren't like multiplying or anything like that. But the inability to balance emotions correctly creates the stress, and the stress amplifies the cancer cells. It amplifies the sickness. It amplifies all these things. And there's cool because there's I love these. I saw like two different interviews, and it was like people that lived past like 100. And one guy was like, and they're like, hey man, what's the key? You've lived to 104. What's the key to a long life? He's like, I smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, right? But then there's another guy that's 30 that smokes a pack of cigarettes, gets cancer, and dies. What's the difference? That guy is totally okay with him smoking cigarettes. He has no conflict about it. He has no nothing. He's fine. Yeah. So he's not experiencing anger or doubt or regret or all these things that could amplify, stagnant cells that could become cancerous. But the other guy is beating himself up. He's tried to quit 20 times. He can't quit. He's mad about it and everything else. There was another lady, same thing. They asked her the same thing. She was like, I drank 2 Dr. Peppers a day, and she lived to be 100, right? When other people are like, no, aspartame, and like all these things are going to cause. No, it's like literally, how are you interpreting your experience? So the reason why I talked about that is because I think this would be probably the same thing. Like, are you beating yourself up for jacking off every day? Or are you doing it and you're doing it in a way in which you're not attaching yourself to porn? Like you can do it literally out of love of self. And if you can do it that way, I imagine it wouldn't be so draining. But the physical effects of porn, right? So now we start throwing in the shame, the guilt, everything else inside of that. I mean, again, the same thing that I guess we both experienced with PID, right? Eventually, like literally, you cannot get turned on by anything that's in real life. And that comes from just mapping this behavior. And again, your subconscious body being like, oh, okay, this is what you like. Cool. Like, okay, open up a laptop. Bing, got you. Oh, I'm in the middle of having sex with a girl. Oh, no, you're not. Yeah. No, this isn't what we like. So there's those physical effects. For me, I was a bodybuilder when I was going through porn addiction. Like, dude, I had like 4% body fat and I was like 210 pounds. And everybody around me was like, wow, you look great and everything else. But internally, I'm like, I don't feel confident at all. Like, I don't like myself. I don't do any of this, right? Yep. So I was able to build a body and do all this stuff while I was on porn. So I don't know if the physical effects really in like how strong you are or anything else. I was pretty strong. But the actual, like what's happening with your sexual function and then what's happening with your psychology and your mental state is so damaging over time. And ultimately, like the things that I connect with these guys inside of here, I'm like, hey man, like the reason why, your relationship is in shambles is porn. The reason why you're not getting promotions at work is porn. The reason why you're stuck at your job and you want to go be an entrepreneur, but you're afraid to go be an entrepreneur is porn. Like all these different things, it's the origin point of a blossoming web of all your problems. And if we can just start focusing on dropping this thing, the clarity that comes from it is incredible. And then from that clarity, I can't remember the name of the quote, the guy who said this quote, but he said that self-discipline is the chief element in self-respect. Self-respect is the chief element in courage, right? And then courage is the thing that actually leads you to success. So we have to start with basically saying, doing what we say we're going to do. I'm going to quit porn. Cool, do it. Then you're going to feel really great about yourself. Now you're respecting yourself. Now with feeling better about yourself and not feeling so inadequate, now courage starts to come into play. We're going up the energy frequency chart. Courage starts to come into play. And if you're vibrating courage and you get around somebody that's vibrating love, that person will elevate you all the way up through it and bring you to where you want to go. So I can show guys when they're coming to me, I was like, I use that chart sometimes to show them exactly where they are. You're here and here, right? You're feeling shame and guilt. You're also experiencing fear, but you've overcome it in some way to have the courage to be with me right now. And if you decide to come on, I'll take you up through understanding. I'll take you up through joy. I'll take you all the way up to love of yourself. And it's all about you just taking that first step to be courageous enough to be here. But most guys are just crippled by fear because they're crippled by judgment and loss. I'm going to lose everything if I come out about this. Like, it's so funny, man. Transparency is literally transparent, but fear turns it into this thick ass wall that you feel like you can't get through. And just once you bust through, you're like, man, why didn't I do this sooner?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
If two guys like you and I can come out about their porn addiction, then you can too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the trick is that you feel like you're going to lose everything, and there's a case that you might, but it's actually everything you never wanted.
Yes.
Like, that's the biggest thing. Like, that's how I felt when it was happening. I was like, I'm losing my friends, I'm losing my business, I'm losing my ex-wife, I'm going to lose me everything. And then when I started to do my work, I was like, I literally now have everything I could ever want. And I never thought I could be in this space. And everything that I want now is nothing that I used to want.
Yes.
And it's all about the ego brought me to this place, but the spirit is really the thing that's unlocked now. And that's my authentic self. And whatever happens from here, it's a beautiful life.
Boom. All right. So now tell us how we can get in touch with you and your coaching to fully see this, into fruition.
Cool. Yeah. So you can find me on pretty much all social outlets, Zack Blakeney, my name. And then the website is taketheredpill.io. And then also, if you come from this podcast and you want to just have a conversation, if you just DM me Red Pill, like, I'll know that you're coming from this podcast. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. And just kind of like we were talking about before, like, if you just want a reflection or like you just want some advice or anything, like, I don't hold back. Like, I'm going to give to you, and we're here to serve and help you.
Boom. Love it, Zach. All right. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. And I love that we got the table covered in gas station dick pills. So right now what Zach and I are going to do is we're going to test some of these for you guys and come out with a YouTube video comparing all the different gas station pills. No, just kidding. But yeah, look at these things. We got Big Cock, Black Dragon, Hard Steel with the Washington Monument on it, Tiger, and Spanish Fly.
The obelisk.
Yeah. So awesome. Well, yeah, this has been wonderful. Appreciate you coming on. And we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, it's my honor. Thank you, brother.